Well, my name is Nick Mihailovsky. I work at Google. For the people who I haven't, I did a couple presentations. So if you don't know me, I lead our developer relations team. So we work with everybody who integrates all the technical parts of analytics. So we classify developers as people who write code. So if you write code, somehow our team works with you to make you better at using our product. So I'm here to talk today about our mobile SDKs, what you can do with tracking analytics. So how many people here have a mobile application that they've built? All right, a couple guys. Do you use our SDKs at all? Oh, great, fantastic. For everybody else, this will be a great educational experience since nobody else uses it. How many people have like a mobile website that they build that's different from their main website? Oh, okay, cool. Are you using GA to do some of the stuff that Caleb was doing? Is it useful? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so this is going to be educational for a lot of people. That's cool. If you have any questions as I'm going through this, just raise your hand and ask me, because I'm happy to answer them for you. Not a problem. So what a lot of people think of Google Analytics is web analytics, and it's slightly bigger than just web analytics. It's really about tracking how visitors interact with content, and that content includes tracking how people are interacting with mobile devices. So we provide native SDKs to track Android and iOS applications. We have a whole website, just because this is like, you know, let's learn GA. Let's get intimate with GA. We have a whole website with lots of amazing resources at code.google.com, APIs Analytics. When you go over to our user guides and reference, we have mobile tracking. And if you come into mobile tracking, we have a lot of resources around how to track various iOS, Android applications. These are all our developer guides. In here as well as we have a bunch of downloads. And so kind of the first step to start tracking any of these things is to come to this page and download our SDKs. So with iOS, it's sometimes difficult to work with, you know, the Apple community for some reasons, but the Android guys like us a lot. So we've integrated really close with the Android SDK as well. And so under the third party, the Android, and when you can get third-party libraries in the actual Android SDK, analytics is listed there as well. So if you're using Android and the SDKs they provide, it's really easy to get our library as well. But you can download it here, and it's super easy to use. Just for people who, so your hands don't get tired. Most of the rest of my presentation is going to be presenting the docs. So I'm going to do it like with a lot of exciting, you know, characters. So it's going to be fun. So what is our, I'm going to focus on Android just because that's something that I've done a lot more of, but our iOS SDK does a lot of the same functionality as well. So what can you do with their SDKs? Well, you can track how users interact with the content in your application. You can track unique users, so number of active users using your application. That's really valuable, especially if you're developing for multiple platforms like iOS and Android, and you want to know where should I invest my resources to build the next feature. You know, well, one way to look at that and to analyze that question is to look at where the usage is. And by looking at unique users, unique visitors in analytics, you can get a better sense of where people are actually using the application. You can also look at unique users by content. So if you're tracking various levels in a game, or you have various screens or various features, you can look at feature usage and figure out, you know, what are people actually doing in the applications. You can track page views with analytics, so how many people viewed various pieces of content. You can track events. We have Ecommerce Tracking, custom variables, and with Android specifically, we have a really nice integration with the Android market. So you can track how many people click an ad, come to your Android market listing, and then click install, and then actually start interacting with the app. With e-commerce, you can tie that campaign information back to the revenue, so you can get a better sense of how much revenue you're getting from your ads in the Android market. So if you're building an app, you guys are building an app for sure. You've done all this integration, right? You should, yeah.
Actually, we probably company has, I don't know, 25, but they're all using Site Catalyst, and so we're. Oh
yeah. So you're going to be using this someday. So, okay, good.
Over, yeah.
Nice. So all this, yeah. So this market referral stuff is really nice because we work with them, and we try to make sure that we have all the data as well. Okay, so let's talk about getting started. How do you start using this SDK? We try to make it pretty easy. All our SDKs are in a jar, so you just download this from the site that I just showed you on our developer site. You download the jar, and then you link the jar to your application. So now your application knows how to do it. And then each Android application has what's called an Android manifest file, and this specifies how various intents get mapped to different activities. If you don't know what that means, it's okay. You don't need to know. You just need to know that there's 2 simple lines you add to this file, and then you're ready to go. And what all it does is it says this application has access to the internet, and it has access to the network state, so that we know whether you're connected in the library or not connected in the library. Really easy. 3 steps, and you're ready to go. Cool. So once you've got that library linked, these are the 3 lines that you use. This is similar to, like, if you think of copying and pasting the JavaScript tracking code, this is like copying and pasting the Java Android code. You create an analytics tracker. You create, analytics tracker has a singleton that creates an instance of this Google Analytics Tracker object, and this is created from the library. And you call start a new session. And you pass it your web property ID, and you pass it the context. And you call all this information on the onCreate method of every activity. So what this means is in Android, each activity every screen is generally called an activity or a view. And every time that's created, onCreate is called. And so we'll create the analytics instance, we'll set the tracking ID, create a new session, and you're ready to go. So that's pretty good. So once this code runs, a lot of magic happens under the scene. In the JavaScript world, we use cookies to store visitor information. Well, there's no cookies in Android. You only eat cookies after you've launched your app and you're celebrating. So instead, what you do is we have this persistent storage, and there's databases, and we actually use the SQLite data storage on the application. So what happens is when this is executed, we figure out whether the user has this storage, and if not, we create just a random ID. It's not personally identifiable. There's no way to tie back to a user. It's just a random ID, and we store it in this database. And once it's in the database, every time the user comes back to your application, we read that ID, and that's how we get our visitor ID. Other solutions uses a device ID, and there's debates on whether it's good or bad to use the device ID. Analytics uses just a completely anonymous ID, and it's all in the application state. What's nice about this ID too is that if you have a device and you wipe the entire device, the ID, and then you reinstall an application, that ID will be new when you reinstall the application. So it's not like you're tracking a visitor when they share the device, and it's like a 5-year-old visitor and there's like 20 people who use that device. It's per application. The other thing about that ID is, again, it's per application. It's not specifically to all the applications on the device. Okay, so that's how we track unique users in analytics. And I mean, it's a super valuable metric. So one of the things with a mobile device is you might not always be online all the time. You might go offline and start interacting with content. And so what we do is when you send events, what we'll do is we'll queue up events, and after a period of time, we'll send them to Google Analytics. So there's a method called dispatch that actually sends all the data from the queue, and then in this start new session method, there's a parameter that shows you after how much time should you send all these events. So think about this use case. Like, you're using your application, you're online, data is being sent to analytics, and then you go offline. What we'll do is we'll then start queuing up all the different requests that we're making to Google Analytics. And finally, when you connect back online, then we'll go and send all that historical data back to GA. So that way we can continue to track users when they're not connected to the internet. So that's quite,
It's probably an obvious answer, but that probably means then that our real-time reports for mobile are not accurate?
Well, they're going to be accurate when we can collect data.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can't do like the mind reading of like when people are interacting with the device and like there's no way to send that information to analytics. So instead, we just queue them up, and then when they come back online, we do that.
Is it then pushed to real-time still, or is it just go to the report?
It'll go straight to real time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, quick question then, do you time stamping each one of those that's been put in the queue, and then in the reporting, does it reflect the actual time that tracker was created, or is it based on the time that it actually got to sync?
Yeah, it's a great question. Currently, it is on the time that it was sent to analytics, right? So if you're being sent, if you're collecting the data from yesterday and you sync, all those timestamps will be for when it was sent. That's the current way it works. It's a little bit tricky to figure out like when data is ready in analytics. Like there's many reports that are like, you know, like the intelligence report and the goal conversions where like latent hits make it really difficult to calculate some of those things. So it's always right now, it's like when the data was collected. Anyway, so we have this nice little event, this dispatching queue, and you can send the value here. And anyway, this is all part of the SDK. You don't have to set up anything. It just does it for you. Debugging applications. So one of the things is like when you're using when you're building the application, you want to send what data. You want to figure out like when are you actually sending data to Google Analytics. So we create this debug value, and when you set it to true, all the data, all the requests that are sent to Google Analytics are actually logged. So Android comes with a logger built in, and you can log anything to a standard logging utility. And so when this is set to true, all the UTM GIF requests are actually logged in this logger utility. So what people generally do is set this to true when they're debugging before they go into production to make sure all the different buttons are actually sending the events that they want them to send. So that's how a lot of people do the test. When we started introducing the set debug to true, so that way data was being sent for testing, we started seeing a lot of erroneous data in the reports because this was test data and not real data. So we added a special method called set dry run equals to true. What dry run does is it only sends the data to the logging. It doesn't send it to actually Google Analytics. So you actually don't have test data in your account when you're tracking that stuff. Privacy is really important for certain countries, more so than other countries. We released this method called set anonymous IP. And so when you set this, certain parts of the IP address are stripped, so that way it's in kind of compliance with various countries' legal terms, kind of policies as well. So this is very similar to what we have as the anonymous IP in the tracking code, and it's available on the mobile as well. So if you're looking to implement, have your application in various markets, you can always use this anonymized IP address. Does anybody use set anonymous IP in the rest of Google Analytics? Everybody here is a US-based company. All right, let's just get this slide. And it's good. Sometimes people really like that. We've had a lot of feature requests in other countries for that. So you guys obviously don't care too much. And then sample rate, 50%. So a lot of times when we have the web, when we launched Google Analytics, it was all about web-based tracking, and you can just view a page, and that's what we're tracking. But now when we're talking about these applications, everybody wants to track with events and interactions. People are sending all sorts of requests to analytics. So sometimes you start sending too much data to GA, and we contact you and say you're sending too much data. So you can actually set the sample rate of how much data gets sent to analytics at any given time. Okay, pretty straightforward. Here's the track page view method. This is really similar to what we have in the JavaScript client library. A lot of people are like not sure like where's the page in an application, and they're going crazy because they don't know what it means. Generally the way we think of it is like, what does a page view really mean in analytics? And so all it means is that when you call track page view, you're sending some data to analytics. And every time it's called by default in the JavaScript version is when a page loads. So when a page loads, by default, the page is calling track page view. So really, you're not tracking anybody viewing a page, you're tracking the load of a page or the load of this kind of screen. And in many ways, you could think of this track page view as being like tracking screens or views in the browser. And so when you think of mobile applications, you can use track page views to track actually the various screens and views that people have in your application. Of course, over time, like what's a screen? If one icon change, is that a screen? If 50% of the screen changes, is that a screen change? If the whole 100% the area changes, is that a screen change? So there's a little kind of gray area in there. But generally, if a majority of the page is or the screen is changing, you could think of that as like the screen is loading a new view. and then you could use the track page view for that. So we generally say use track page view when you want to track views of content and not interactions within the view as well. The other method you have, of course, is event tracking. Does everybody know what event tracking is here? Yeah, you guys are all pros. Okay. So event tracking is more around tracking the interactions with the content itself, not just the passive viewing. And again, you can pass all the different values here. Usually people are using this to track button clicks within an actual application. A lot of other people are using this value. And so tracking time spent is kind of a difficult metric in Google Analytics to calculate. The default page time metrics that we have is what we do is we take one page and then we take the second page and look at those timestamps and take the delta of those. And so that's not the most flexible way of looking at data. If you only have one page view but not the second page view, that's 0, so we don't even include that information. And so if you really want to get the most precise kind of time spent in analytics, what we tell people to do is take a timestamp when you want to first start tracking them, take the timestamp when they're done, take the delta, and pass that in event tracking. Right? And so what you're doing is this value then becomes a total amount of time spent in a section of the site. It might be a total amount of time spent playing a level. It might be total amount of time spent watching a video on your device. You could send that value. And then in the analytics in the report, we'll give you not only the total amount of time spent in that section, but we'll also give you the average. So average is really what you're looking for, average time spent interacting with that content. Of course, you can actually, some people like to put kind of histogram buckets in this label. So what we've seen people do is say, if the time spent is between 0 and 500 milliseconds, put them in one bucket. If it's from 501 to 1,000, put them in a second bucket. From 1,000 to 2,000, put them in a third bucket. And then you can actually kind of get this histogram view when you're looking at the labels for these events. And then you could break that down further into the value as well. So it's a richer way to see time spent engaging within applications. Is anybody using events to track time? So you can do this on the web too. A lot of companies I've worked with, we help advise them to do that. Generally works pretty well.
What's the action that's firing that event at the end of the page?
What's that?
The page load starts it, and then you said there's an event that fires at the end of the page.
Right. So if you just did page load and you're using so generally, like if you're playing like a level in a game and you want to know how many people complete the level and how much time does it take somebody to complete a level, once they complete the level, your application is handling that interaction, that changing of state. And so when it does that, it could actually finish the timestamp and send the actual data once you're done with that level.
What do they do when it's the web-based compliance?
They could do the same thing. So let's take like I don't know, if you're playing like a game or something, you just have a timer and you have logic that when you're going from level 1 to level 2, once you reach level 2, then you know how long level 1 took, and then you could send the event. Yeah?
So on our side, we have a feature story. So event tracking would be useful to track the time that spending reading stories. So if I'm following you correctly, we would have to set something up as a timer that would, at some point, timestamp and say they'd watch it for this long.
Yeah, exactly.
We couldn't do it basically when they left the page. We have to fire something as they leave the page in order to get the timestamp. Follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean some browsers support, so for browser-based things, some browsers support like the unload, so body on unload,
Okay.
and then you could send a event tracking thing in the unload.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you have that timestamp. And then like tracking time within content with these event tracking is like super powerful. It was like a couple years ago. It was slightly different, but it was using our flash tracking, but it was still an application. Worked with Adobe. They did some New York Times reader application. And so the way that they used, Adobe bought a shirt too. It's kind of funny. Before they did, I was working with them, and the way they used event tracking was they have different sections. The New York Times had different content sections. They wanted to know how much time people spend in news, how much time people spend in sports, in entertainment. And the way they set it up is they just had a timer that throughout the entire day, it would track the total amount of time spent in each of those different sections. And at the end of the day, it would take the sum of all those and send a particular, just one event with the total value to analytics. And so they're not even using, they didn't even care about the amount of, like, number of interactions. They just wanted total amount of time spent per day sent to analytics so they could get a better understanding of where people were spending time reading content. So yeah, that was a great use as well of the time. Very similar to like what you're trying to do. Does anybody else have great use cases about event tracking? Okay, everybody's going to come up with great use cases once they, now that they know how to use it. How many people use custom variables? Great. So custom variables, again, we have all the support for all of these in the actual SDK as well. They're pretty straightforward. Whether you can set a custom variable. The first one is the index. The second is the name and the value. And then you have these various scopes, whether it's visitor, session, or page level scopes. And you just pass the numbers 1, 2, or 3. Pretty straightforward. For these page level scopes, these are great to group content, group related content in your application. So it might be like the gaming section versus the actual the configuration section. Or it could be, certain levels. You might say like these are a higher set of levels versus another set of levels. Session for people who are logged in. You can get a better understanding for people who are logged into your app or not. And then for visitor, if you have premium content that you're pushing through your app, you can use the custom variables as well. So this is very similar to what we have on the web, but again, it's all available through. These are kind of like the interface that we provide to all that stuff. We have e-commerce tracking. We released this about a year ago. It works slightly different than. Actually, it works exactly the same as how we have it on JavaScript, but it's kind of unique. On the tracker, you call transaction, and then for each item, you add it. And then finally, you call track transaction. And so it takes all the transaction items and puts it into an actual buffer. And then once it's in the buffer, when you call dispatch, again, you're using dispatch to send all the data to analytics. You call dispatch, and the data gets sent. So the model is interesting because not in the JavaScript, you call track trans, and it sends all the data. Here, you call track trans. And then it goes into this buffer until you call it dispatch, and it gets sent to analytics. That way, you can actually use this when people are offline and maybe trying to do a purchase or something. You can use this tracking for that as well. Okay. So as I mentioned, we do have the campaign tracking in the SDK. So if you're running an AdWords campaign or some ad campaign, and it's going to the marketplace, and people then install your application. All you need to do is update your Android manifest file and add these lines of code. So these lines of code tells analytics that we're listening for this install referral intent, and then to call this part of our SDK. Anyway, if you're not technical and you don't do Android, this is probably not useful for you, but just know that this is very valuable for the people implementing it, and that you can track the campaign referrals in analytics. So once you set that up, you can actually pass all the various UTM campaign parameters. This is very similar how we have it on the websites, except that it'll go directly to the app marketplace. And then if you have other systems like, if you have your own referrals and stuff, you can actually send that URL here and set it manually. Anyway, so here's a bunch of resources. For documentation or SDKs, there's a bunch of code on here as well. So yeah, that's mostly kind of a high-level, overview of how our native Android SDK works. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
Can you track the keywords from the marketplace?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can. So so that's part of what you do is you update that Android manifest file, and then. Market actually sends that stuff in this intent, and then our receiver picks up all the values from the intent. Yeah, so you can get all the keywords, campaigns, any of the data that's coming. Yeah.
Is there any difference between events in mobile and events on the web?
No, like the data model for both of them are very similar.
And you still get 5?
Well, you get 5 custom variables, but for the events, like you can send as many events as you want. So the question is like, when do you use? when you use like in an application, everybody was like, when to use page, when to use event, you could use them both together. And so the best practices I've come up with around content is understanding when people are viewing content, use this page view. And then when people are interacting with content, they're actually, touching the device or whatever, use these events to track them. So that way you can see kind of the views of these various screens. Think of them as screen views in the application versus clicking on buttons.
But for visitor level, you'd still, you'd want it to be custom, right?
For visitor, yeah, you'd want to use a custom variable, yeah. So what they are snippets that you put on your web server. And your application will call these snippets and it'll send data to analytics. And because these snippets and all the logic live on your server, there's no JavaScript required. So it's really nice for these feature phones. So how does this magic without JavaScript happen? It's pretty simple. There's only 5 steps. You upload this file to your server, and so like in this case it's GA-PHP. It will be like JSP or any of the different languages. You modify your template to write an image to the page. So that's pretty straightforward. There's no JavaScript there. Now, when somebody accesses the page that has this image on it, that mobile browser actually requests that image. And so that request for that image goes back to this GA script, in this case, this GA-PHP script. So in that request, we get all this like IP address, we get information like user agent, all sorts of information from the actual device. And then that script actually proxies that the data back to Google Analytics. So that way we can give you some geo information, we can give you some content information. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, it's pretty cool because there's no JavaScript to handle that. So I mean, it's a little bit limited in feature support. You only can track page views. There's no cookies in this, so all the cookie stuff is done on the servers. It's not done in JavaScript. There's no persistent information. So we do that all on the server side. We do all the campaign information on the server side as well, so it's a little bit different. And there's some options to do some visitor tracking. You can use either cookies if they're available, or we use a device ID, or we just put a random number in there if it's there. So there's some limited support for these mobile snippets as well. If this sounds like the coolest thing ever, it's really easy to start learning more about it. If you go back to this mobile site and you go to mobile websites, we have the text version of my presentation right here. See, there's the PHP stuff, right? And that's all you got to do to put this on your page. You download the PHP library. You come over here and you click PHP. Yeah, there we go. Very cool. And this is the part that just actually writes the image to the page. So we have these for like a bunch of popular languages as well. Yep. Does anybody have questions about this fantastic stuff? No, it's getting late, I know. Cool, well that's mostly what I want to talk about. Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff we're doing around the mobile, on the mobile reporting side. We have the native SDKs, you get the unique visitors. It's pretty powerful in terms of the amount of reporting you can do around the mobile applications as well. But yeah, thanks guys.